Chapter 2 Resumes. Stupid, annoying, and complicated resumes. What it is: resume is a concise picture of your skills and qualifications. You're going to submit this as part of the normal job application process. It will list relevant experience. Resume or CV. You may have heard one, the other, or both. A CV, Latin for curriculum vitae and meaning course of life, is meant to be a full history of academic credentials used to apply for roles in research, medical, academic fields. These tend to be used to try for academic grants, research positions, and fellowships. Well, that's weird, you might say. I've heard it used the same as a resume. Well, because the world is fun, a CV in Europe and other places like New Zealand is simply what we call a resume here in the United States. Also, in the US and Canada, people will sometimes interchangeably use the term CV and resume while always meaning what we will be referring to as a resume. So, if you're used to hearing CV in a resume context, just replace when I say resume with CV. Resume is French for summary, and specifically what we will be talking about here, which is a summary of your experience as it pertains to an industry position. This is what we're going to get into. This is what you're going to be submitting along with your portfolio when you're applying for studio game dev positions. The pain in the ass part. Use an ATS friendly font around 10 to 12 point. Have you heard of ATS friendly? If not, buckle up, buddy. Why is this a pain in the ass? ATS friendly means it's optimized for scanning by applicant tracking systems, which is a software that scans for specific information on a document. When you've heard me or other people say algorithms are sometimes auto rejecting your resume and you actually never had it seen by a person, this is the piece of shit that's been doing that. Yes, this means a computer will likely be making a decision on your resume before it reaches human hands. Thus, you will want to have your best chance of it getting properly read by the software so it might actually see the light of day. The idea of this can be stressful and sometimes leads to resumes being auto-rejected even if they are perfectly suited. Hate it, but this is how it is. And this is very important. This isn't like a couple places use this. This is standard, and it's been standard for a long time. This is actually very old technology too, which is the worst part of it. Short version of how ATS works is it will scan for keywords and match them to the job description and possibly other parameters to create a score. The higher the match or score, the greater chance of a recruiter actually seeing your resume. It's like a test you didn't know that you had. Navigating ATS. You need to use simple fonts, bullet points. Try not to use tables or graphics, which is really annoying because colleges right now are going to teach you to use tables, use graphics, really punch it up, make it look beautiful, make it a piece of art. And ATS eats those things for lunch and craps them out in the garbage. Keep your formatting simple and standard. Again, you're going to end up with a resume that looks maybe too simple and you might feel bad about it. You need it to get read. As long as the information is there, that's the most important part. Top 10 ATS-friendly fonts are, and feel free to screenshot this if you need to, Times New Roman, Tahoma, Verdana, Arial, Helvetica, Calibri, Georgia, Cambria, Gill Sans, Garamond. This is important because you want to stay, there are more than this, and you can just look up ATS-friendly fonts, and I encourage you to do so, but you're gonna wanna stay within that range because there are a lot of font types that ATS just won't wholly read or won't read at all. And when ATS doesn't register something, it means it doesn't see it at all. The page might as well be blank there. If you put a whole bunch of things in a table, ATS won't
Oh,
see
I
it
guess
at
I
all.
was calling the number you had in Germany.
Sorry, Ivana, can you mute your mic, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Use straightforward language whenever possible. The more jargon or uncommon terms you use, the more likely ATS will be unfamiliar with it. So yes, the language you use as well is going to be a problem. Do not use tables or text boxes. If you use these, the ATS will not be able to read what is inside of them, so be wary if you're using pre-made templates or resume building sites. That's a real pain in the ass one, quite honestly. Resume building sites, and actually you can buy entire like kits for this, will set you up for failure with ATS. This is one of those things that a lot of people don't even know exists. A majority of people I've talked to about resumes aren't aware of this, and it's a very simple thing to navigate, in my opinion, but if you don't know it's there, it's why you could shotgun your resume out to 40 places and only hear back from like one. Sometimes that's the reason, not always. Instead, you can use tabs, justification settings, and indents in order to provide appealing and legible structure. You can employ line breaks and bullet points. We'll get into some examples, don't worry. Use a single to 1.5 point spacing. This way, if you have a shorter portfolio, you can use 1.5 to fill the page better. Filling a page is going to be important. Also, not filling out to having 2 sentences on the next page is going to be important. We'll show an example. You want to use the most easily parsed formats for ATS, so save your resume as a Microsoft Word document, or if you have to, as a plain text document. If your employer posts using PDF or whatever, always use whatever file type they say when you're applying. Even if it's something you never heard of, always use what they say first. If not, default to Microsoft Word or plain text document. This is just for ATS services. If they're asking for PDF, then they may be using a different format. This means if you also want to focus let's try that again. English language. This means you also want to focus on keywords. Look through the job description and include any phrases or words that show up multiple times. Don't just stick these anywhere. Be intentional and natural in your execution. This is going to come up later in the LinkedIn section. And there is a LinkedIn section. If the job description is making it very clear that it wants specific things, you're going to want those to show up specifically in that way in your resume so that ATS scans it and sees it. When dealing with ATS, occasionally less is more. Listing every single thing you can do regardless of relevancy is no good. You need to tailor it to the specific job you are applying for. This means customizing your resume to an extent for some of the jobs you apply for. ATS functions poorly when a resume is too long or too complex. Save that kind of stuff for your cover letter, which we'll get into. ATS also picks up on errors, just like people do. So always check for grammar and spelling. It helps if you have someone else look it over for you. In fact, have multiple people look it over for you. Surprise, it's General Resume Guidelines. Hi, welcome. When you list your skills, try to be brief and concise. If you're unsure how to explain your skills, look up examples and adjust your description. There are no rules not to look at existing resumes from other people and just crib off how they do things. You're going to tailor it to you. So don't worry about that. It's fine. People do this all the time. It's not really stealing or anything. You're just like, what looks good, presents it well. If you know, you're like, hey, I'm a concept artist, but I don't know how to word that. Look at the resumes that people have posted when they've applied for those positions successfully and be like, does this fit for me? Can I reword it this way? Does that make sense? That helps with simplification and stuff as well. Avoid excess stylish or playful sections in portfolios. These are often taught as a way to make yourself stand out, but at best they tend to offer very little usable information, and at worst will get your resume tossed. These include using excess graphics or things like ability point meters. Oh, I'm going to get into those later. I hate those. Hey, look, here they are. These are ability point meters. Some college courses, resume courses, or examples will show these. These are really stupid. This shit is arbitrary, illogical, and highly subjective. You're just making up a relative scale, assuming everything is judged equally. It fills space, and ATS and HR aren't going to read this. It's not a thing like that you should do ever. If you get through with this, you're lucky. It's not the rule. Saying that you have 2 points in Linux and 5 points in Windows 10, okay. What does that mean? Like, there's no granularity to any of this at all. I just know that this person on the right has more high fidelity prototyping skill than they do in information architecture, according to themselves, with no qualification. Don't do this. It's cute, it looks good, and that's it. ATS is going to eat you alive. Try not to fluff excessively. Fluffing or padding your resume is when you exaggerate your abilities or try to mold something simple into something greater, knowing it is not the same. An example of this would be running D&D games and then turning it into leadership experience on your resume. I know you've probably heard this. I know that Thor has put this out there. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Sure, if you can pull it off, go for it. But most people are going to raise an eyebrow at this. And when someone can tell you're excessively fluffing one area, everything else on your resume falls into suspicion. That's not a good look, and that's not good luck for you. Everybody kind of exaggerates a little bit or turns what they can kind of do into something they can do. That's fine. That's normal. But The example here is one I've run into a lot because it went around the internet a lot, where they're like, "Oh, you've GM'd, so you have leadership experience." That's not what leadership in studio game dev is like at all, and we'll get into that later because there's a whole damn chapter on it. To be frank, most people fluff their resume, and you will compete against those people for positions. In the long run, fluffing can make things difficult for you and set up false expectations, which can hurt you and your team. While you should never undersell yourself, be very careful about how much fluff you put into your resume. If you misrepresent yourself to the extreme, it can be grounds for dismissal. And I've seen this. I've seen people really fluff up their resume to excess. And I'm not talking about going like, I'm a really creative concept artist and your concepts aren't that creative. That's whatever. That's just normal. I'm talking about like almost to the point of legal grounds misrepresentation. Just be careful, and if you're ever unsure, ask people. I mean, a normal amount of fluffing is going to be just a slight bit of exaggeration here and there. Most people try and upsell themselves, and right now, because everybody kind of does that, you're kind of in trouble if you don't do it at all. I don't generally do it at all, and it has hurt me. So, use your better judgment here. Also, be wise enough not to put a bunch of general BS in your resume that you cannot confidently speak on, or folks will see through it when it comes time for the interview. That's a key one. You're going to be tested on what you put down. People aren't going to always take you for your word. So you need to be able to back that up. And if you don't have that experience, if you're in an interview and you were to tell me that I ran D&D games and that was my leadership experience, I would end the interview right there. I'm not going to lie. Be confident, but don't fake it till you make it. Fake it till you make it goes around a lot. It usually ends up fake it until you keep faking it because you don't acquire the skills you need. It's a bad statement that is usually used in good faith, but executed in bad faith. So just try to take a better approach than that. If this isn't your first rodeo, always mention your completed game projects, especially include personal indie projects. That's a key one. And that comes up when people are like, what do I do if I don't have any experience? If you've worked on, and not even to completion, your own projects in any way, put that stuff on there. Because if you've completed a project and this is your first delve into applying at a studio game dev, and I can see or even play that project, dude, you're putting yourself ahead of sometimes people with multiple years of just in-studio experience in one specialized area. If you worked on contract with a large company, do not list that you worked for them in your resume. Instead, put that you worked with them. Otherwise, you're going to lead people to believe that you were internally employed as a full-time worker. This is misleading and have negative result. I've run into this multiple times. It's caused confusion in interviews when somebody does like freelance work for League or something like that, and then they're like, I worked at Riot. And it's like, you did not work at Riot. You worked externally, and you worked for Riot on contract. And again, if you get caught in kind of a misinformational arena like that, it's going to be casting suspicion on everything else you've said. You just don't want to be in that. Nobody's going to look down on you that you did contract work for Riot. It's fine. It's good work. It's going to really kind of outline what your experience is, and that's important. Resume format. Look at that. This is the part where we're going to get into how it looks. There are no completely standard format, but here are some recommended rules to keep in mind. Try to keep it between 1 to 3 pages, with 1 page being optimal. I know that's weird, but 1 page actually is optimal. 2 pages is fine. When you start getting to 3 pages, you probably should have been in the industry for quite a long time. You don't want to have a partial spill to the second page. By that, I mean like if you have a full first page and just 3 sentences on the second page, that's no bueno. Don't do that. Always number the pages of your portfolio in an XX format. So page 1 of 2, page 2 of 2. Just do it, because if you have more than 1 page, that's the only way they're going to know if that stuff gets printed out and separated. You just want to hedge your bets here. Always have your contact information at the top. I will show you how to do this, but always have it there. Always. Don't just put your name in a silly title and hide it. Don't do that. There are 5 to 6 parts of your resume. The contact section, the objective summary, which is optional and actually shows up less nowadays. I'll contextualize that shortly. Your experience, your education, and skills and optionals. To elaborate on those sections, Contact section. This is your name, phone number, email, city, state, country, and a link to your portfolio. Optionally, this is also where you'd put something like your LinkedIn or relevant sites. That's not necessary. Make your name twice as large as the font size you use for the body of your resume. Always have your name nice, big, and bold, because that's going to be your reference point. Now, if you are applying, again, this is for within the United States. If you're applying from outside the United States, just filter this to what applies to you. It's fine. Generally, you can follow this format and just adjust the information for where you are. Hey, look, these are the tops. That's me, Jay Axer, Charlie Gardner, Dwayne Carter. So these are examples of what you can do. Notice that on mine, I have a link to my portfolio up there. That's something you're going to want to be doing. Don't hide your portfolio. Don't do that. So like I said, your name, phone number, email, city, state, country, link to your portfolio. You can format it in different ways, but always have that be at the top. Objective and summary. These are optional, and I do emphasize optional. A lot of portfolios I come across these days don't have this. The objective describes your employment goal and provides targets you have that pertain to the position you're applying for. There is no exact way to do this. Find a way that feels natural but not overly casual. An example of this would be saying, my goal is to secure a position as a successful concept artist with a reputable organization where I can use my skills to work with a team, bringing a creative project to life. Now, this kind of sounds like bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, sure, I'm applying for concept art, and of course I want to be part of a team, and of course I want to. That's part of why this has become optional. It's almost redundant, and the cover letter has kind of taken its spot. So you can still do this, and it's not really going to hurt you. But if you're getting page spill onto a second page and you can avoid it, you don't need to do this. The summary is optional as well, and would be a sentence or two that lists or list that states your top skills related to the position you're applying for. Like an opportunity to mention that you have years of experience in a specific position or skills cultivated that demonstrate why you'd be perfect. Like for me, that would be like, I've spent 15 plus years, creating concepts for games ranging across the gamut of blah, blah, blah. You don't really need this, but if you feel that you have a good, concise statement to make here that's very strong, that really emphasizes your best skill set, go for it. If not, optional, you don't need to do it. Honestly, you would likely not put these on your resume unless you have a very short one and need to fill space. And that's the thing, is if you're like new in the industry, you don't have a lot of experience, you're lacking in education, that's where you'd go, I need to fill this. Here you go. You got something to put there. Experience. This is the heart of the resume and should clearly outline the specific work experience you have relevant to the position you're looking for. This is necessary, okay? If you're giving a resume that has no experience whatsoever, and by experience, it doesn't even necessarily mean like completed jobs, just anything related to your skill set, then there's no point in having a resume. You always want to have something to put here, even if it's like I pushed carts at Kroger or whatever. If you're not from the US, that's just a grocery store. This should list the companies you worked for, the title you held, duties you performed there, and length of time you were there. Typically shown as a month-year format, such as January 2017 to March 2020, and you put to present if you're still employed. So like for me, it would be 2023 to present. If you shipped any titles while at each position, be sure to include those. Really do it. I've seen a lot of people who shipped a lot of games. I know that majority of people are probably just trying to get into the industry and haven't done that yet. But for future reference, if you ever get in and you ship games, put that shit on your resume. Don't skimp. Every shipped title is a huge boon to your resume. A lot of companies will sometimes weigh in on whether they're going to hire someone based off of, does this person have any shipped titles or not versus this other person who does. Optionally, you can also mention any accolades or achievements you received, awards, anything like that. If it is a past job, use past tense. And if you are still employed at your job, at your top job, rather, the top one that you list, be sure to use present tense. So that's pretty simple. If it was in the past, use past tense. If it's where you still work, you talk as though you still work there. Sometimes people mess this up. It's not going to probably cost you a job. It just makes for a cleaner resume. And again, you're competing against more people in the industry than ever before. So the more you can do, the better it gets. If you've held many jobs, try to keep it within the last 12 years or so, and bullet point anything further back as to not get lengthy. Again, probably not a majority of the audience here, but this is my situation where I just had to start culling off old jobs that just weren't relevant anymore. Anything past 10 years sometimes people don't look at, but you might be like, oh, 10 years ago, I worked at Valve, and you kind of want to have that on there. So mileage may vary, but something to consider. Don't just like list every minute thing post 10, 12, 15 years. If you are a student, you can include internships and summer jobs as well. If you have zero professional experience, you can list previous jobs that are unrelated as well as freelance work. If it was an irrelevant short-term job, leave it off. So, if you're like, I worked register at the stationery store, probably not. But if you're like, dude, I do freelance. Even if you're not doing a lot of freelance, you did freelance and you're going for an art job. This whole thing has kind of an art perspective here. If you're a designer, you're probably going to get less out of this talk. But basically, you want to leverage freelance and whatnot. It's work you've done that you got paid for, but specifically you're also kind of performing the skill that you're going to be performing on the job you're applying for, and that's very important. Here are some examples. Look at that. Ding. This one looks good. It's clean. It's just kind of listing out what you did. You can see UX designer, freelance consultant, remote, June 2020 to present. So that's how you want to do it. Previous was like August 2016 to March 2020. They have a May 2020, which is just when that happened. That's totally okay. It doesn't always have to span. And it's just kind of nice and clean. It just says they're responsible for environmental, agricultural, cultural education lessons, stuff like that. You don't necessarily want to be saying, I was there to perform these things. Just say performed and then tasks. Nice and clean. Don't fluff this. Don't pad it. Bullet points are totally fine. Here's another one. Kind of the same thing, but you can see that the formatting's different. This is just to give a bit of an example that you don't have to stick to a strict format. But I do want you to note that visually, these are essentially just bulleted lists. There aren't tables. You're just manually formatting and indenting. And so this is very ATS friendly. It doesn't look impressive if you were to show this to an artist and go, look how neat my resume looks. It's going to be kind of basic. And it might not feel exciting, but this is what people want to see. They need it organized and clean. ATS can read this and HR can look through this. I did a lot of hiring at multiple different jobs that I was at, and these kind of resumes work the best for me. Also, I can print this out in the interview and use it as a bullet point to discuss with you during the interview. Here's another one. This one's very simple. See? Very, very basic, but totally works. All three of these work. They're essentially the same thing. It's not a problem. You can see that the one on the right, it's a little harder to read when they were there because it's all put together, but the information is there. So I would say try to lean your formatting towards the first and second example, but if you end up in the third, you're still above the curve. So that's pretty solid. But you'll notice it's basic, it's clean, it's not using excessive tables, and it's ATS friendly. Education. This area is used to outline your educational background and any academic awards or achievements you received. If you went to college, include your degrees, honors, etc., so on. Yeah, printer-friendly colors. If you are a recent high school graduate, you can include your high school, but if you are a college grad, you should ditch the high school part. That's not going to matter. And if you've been out of school for a while, don't put high school. It doesn't matter. If you're like me and you're far into your career and only attended high school level formal education, because I never went to college, you can simply list high school education and the school you attended if there was some prestige attached, but honestly, you shouldn't put it on your resume at all. I don't put it on my resume at all. Nobody's going to care that I went to high school. I've already been in the industry. It's a complete waste of time and irrelevant. So that's very much, are you early in? Did you not attend college, or are you not still attending college? If a place mentions they require a multi-year degree, you can always take your chances. just understand that this section may be part that gets you disqualified for advanced roles if you aren't clearly demonstrating elsewhere that you're capable of what they expected that requirement to teach you. That's just a lot of words to say. If they're like, you need a degree in design or something like that, and you don't have it, you need to show in your skill set that you have the equivalent. College degrees are not what they used to be in game dev studio hiring, and we'll get into that later. Skills. This is where you can list specific skills that would pertain to the job you're seeking. Examples would be draftsmanship, specific software you're proficient with, concepting, illustration, etc. This section is usually best formatted as a list. Don't shove any skill you can think of in there. Be intentional. Avoid being overly generalized. Don't list something like drawing, because okay, sure. That's also apparent in your portfolio. And again, this goes back to the ATS stuff that we were talking about earlier. You want to make sure you're not just shotgunning anything and everything onto your resume. Be intentional. Always be intentional. Be clear as to what you're aiming for and clear so that ATS and HR can pick up on it. Good examples would be languages you're fluent in, software you're proficient with, and soft skills like leadership. What are soft skills? Oh my gosh, I have a whole chapter on that later. Optionals. This is where you would put anything that does not fit into the other sections. Examples are awards, community service, side projects you might not have put in your work history. If you're thinking of mentioning hobbies in a casual sense here, consider saving that for your cover letter. You don't want to put in optionals, I play a lot of games, bro. I'm all up on top of what, my finger's on the pulse of the gaming industry. That's your cover letter. And maybe think about saying that a different way. More general resume guidelines. If you have 15 plus experience, they then condense the oldest stuff to make sure your resume isn't too long. I recently had to do that. Don't put your references on your resume. It's not customary and also makes your resume longer. If you're going to include references, you would do so separately and only when requested, usually around when they'd be considering to hire you in post interviews. I'm going to get into this later. It has its own chapter. Don't include a photo or a headshot on your resume. Just don't do it. Again, these are a lot of things that are being promoted by resume courses, college professors, as well as resume kits. Just don't do it. It looks neat, and the whole idea is grab attention of people, but you need to grab ATS's attention first. Don't make mention of salaries you were paid for positions. If that comes up, it will be during interview discussions and only when appropriate. Don't do it. It's weird also. Don't include personal social media account links. Only link to professional items like portfolio site, LinkedIn, project websites, etc. Don't put your Twitter, your Blue Sky, stuff like that that's non-portfolio on there. It's not going to serve you well. Just don't do it because there's no reason to go there. We'll get into that later. Okay, so what's a bad resume look like, huh? What's that look like? Well, it looks like this. Hey, there's a few things on there that we kind of just mentioned. That's weird. How awkward for this. There's a headshot photo on here. You don't need it. It doesn't really serve. I know that, especially in the area of LinkedIn and stuff like that, that it seems useful, but again, it's not great. And a lot of people also print this stuff out in black and white anyways. Casual hobbies. You don't need to put casual hobbies on there. Don't do it. RPG skill meter, we got into this earlier. It's completely just relative useless stuff. Tabled formatting. This is a full table. ATS isn't going to read the contents of this, so I guess it doesn't really matter. I do want you to note that they have Twitter in there as well. Special formatting, don't use special formatting. Just do normal bullet point, do normal indent. Again, ATS isn't going to read half of this resume. This resume looks really nice. It does. It actually looks very nice. I really like the appealing visual of this, but it won't play well with ATS and includes things that just don't belong on a resume. That's a problem. Also like this. Hey, this is a nice looking one, right? Kind of looks like a cafe menu. Headshot photo again. RPG skill meter, but it circles this time. Very appealing, but actually even harder to read. Like, this tells me nothing. Yeah, these are the literal templates. I searched templates, and I was like, this is perfect. I don't even need to go any further. But it illustrates my point exactly. Contact info separate from name and title. Also icons. The icons actually will stunt ATS reading, meaning the information afterwards isn't going to be caught. That's bad. Tabled formatting. This whole damn thing is a table nightmare. Colored backdrop. Guess what happens when you print this shit out? Depends on the printer and the print profile. This will probably be fine, but just don't do it. Keep it white. Again, this resume looks really nice, but isn't formatted for ease of actual use. To be fair, you can use subtle color and pass ATS, but it isn't recommended. For legibility, it's best to stick with black and white and avoid iconography altogether. Many hiring managers will print out simple black and white copies for folks as well, and color can cause issues. They look nice, but they don't serve the purpose. Then there's this. Hey, this is something. Hey, look, it's a photo again. Oh, the RPG skill meter's back. Hey, there's sideways text. What are we doing? Tabled formatting icons and more sideways text with a colored backdrop. I gotta tell you, experience at the bottom like we forgot it because it just doesn't matter. Why not? This is a rad flyer, but we're looking at a future ATS victim in almost every way possible. Visual flair and sideways text will be lost to a hiring manager who wants to get quick info at first glance. Keep it clear, keep it simple. That quote on the bottom left, by the way, like completely should not be. That's cover letter stuff, if anything. This looks neat, and this will impress people who don't work in hiring. Anyway, those are some examples of what to avoid. How about some good examples? Here's some quick examples. This one, clean, fits everything we said. This one, same thing, totally fine. This one as well. This all works. It's all clean. It's all manually formatted. Bullet points. You don't need to use bullet points, but it helps. You can just indent. You'll notice that there's some bold formatting. All of it's very clean, very simple. If I need to look through this, I can at a glance tell where everything is on each of these, and it totally works. You can also print these out and hand them to everybody for an interview, and there's zero issue. I got to tell you something else, okay? When you put a headshot image on your resume, it's also going to create biases. I mean, names do, everything does, but you don't want to introduce biases one way or another. And even though I tend to trust the teams I'm on, I don't want my teams to be imparting biases either. I want them to look first and foremost at the work and the experience, and that's what I want people to be crafting their opinion of the applicant off of, right? So that's another thing to consider. These are not beautiful pieces of paper, okay? But for ATS, they are legible, and for hiring managers, they serve their purpose exactly. And for what we're going to be using them for internal hires, this is where you want to aim. If you have a personal website, make that thing pretty, put sideways text, whatever. You want skill meters, you can put them somewhere else. But I'm telling you, you're going to compete far better with something like this than the previous. And I can already hear people somewhere on the internet going, I got hired top of the line, with the best salary ever with one of those previous looking ones. Cool. You're an exception to the rule. I'm just trying to give you the information that will give you the best bet to compete in the market. Make sure that what screams the loudest on your resume is your experience and how you mention it. And always stay safe when it comes to ATS, because they're going to rip you apart. If you want good art, put it in your portfolio, not on your resume. That wraps it up for resumes. Hey, it's Q&A time, the first Q&A. Okay, so if you have questions, now will be the time. You're going to use the little question mark block in the voice chat, and I can scan for if there were previous ones here. Actually, what's up? Oh, did you post them? Marvelous. Okay. Maybe you'll get into this. How much of your comics experience went into your portfolio or resume? Okay, so I had a good number of years of comics experience, and I actually keep it on there, but it's like a blurb. It's a short sentence at the very bottom of my resume, mentioning that I had worked in comics. I did a stint with Archie. I don't put the Marvel related stuff because that was just like a flash in the pan. But I do put it on there because specifically when I'm working in illustration and concept, having comics background is a little more unusual. Same with like a lot of the freelance work that I do. You get that a bit more now, but it has come up in discussions, and in almost every interview they've been like, "Oh, you used to work in comics. That's interesting." And then I can go into that in the interview and be like, "Well, I'm able to leverage my understanding for all of this in this way over here." And they can see that as a unique perspective. So if you have something like that, that's also like, if you're like, oh, I'm going to be a UX, UI designer, but I made a little indie puzzle game and it doesn't have much UI in it. It's like, okay, but that's a whole interesting different thing you did. You should definitely mention that. So that's kind of what comics is for me, because I have a whole bunch of designed games and design documents and vertical slice things. But comics is one of those kind of more unique areas, and you can leverage it in game art. So I think that that's worth doing. Kite said, do you count cover letters or equivalent in your resume page length? So cover letter is a completely different thing. So your resume is just going to be what we discussed here, which is going to be, your skills and your experience, your education, et cetera, so on. A cover letter or a cover introduction, my chair is squeaking of all times today. That's going to be a different thing. So you don't count your cover letter length towards your resume length whatsoever. DNA says, from your experience, how often do you update your resume, like when a newer software is learned, personal projects are finished, or prior relevant jobs are completed? Every time. Every time you can update it, update it. If you can make it better, just like a portfolio, which we'll get into a little later, you want to update it. There is no reason that you shouldn't have your resume be the best it can at any time. So let's say you spent another year at a job. That's fine. You don't need to update because you're still like that job to present. So it still counts, right? But if you've got new skills within that job, you can do it. One of the reasons I recommend to update your resume actively is so that you don't do what I did and wait until you need to update it later. Then you've got to kind of go through your history again and do it all at once, and you've got the pressure of needing to do it in that moment. Whereas if you got a new accomplishment at work this month, you can just go in, add that line, and this will compile over time. So if you're learning new software, or you want to do whatever, it helps to actively be updating your resume at all times. Also keep in mind that just like portfolios, you can have different resumes for different jobs that highlight different things. So something that we went into briefly was that you want to kind of highlight keywords for the position. So if, let's say there's a concept art posting and an illustration posting, and they're mutually exclusive. One's pure concept and one's pure illustration. You can adjust your portfolio for one and have a different portfolio for the other. Nobody's going to be like, oh, this is a different portfolio than you gave to that company. It's fine. As long as it's true and accurate and you feel it suits it, keep that thing updated, make different versions if you need to. I think that works. So hopefully that answers the question. Rap says, how would you fill out a resume when you've had little actual industry experience? For example, I've done freelance for a very long time, but that's one thing to list. So what you want to do is you want to get the most out of it that you can. If you've done specific types of freelance and you can parse those separately from each other, that would be a way to do it. If not, you can get away with just saying, I've done freelance, and explain the ins and outs of what that means, and then put a really long year listing. You know what I mean? And you can just list yourself as an independent contractor running freelance artwork, design, and illustration for this long. Or you could go done concept illustration for this length of time and then overlap it with illustration. It's kind of saying the same thing. It really depends on if you want to fill out your resume. But don't like parse freelance into like 3 or 4 things, because now you're just creating nonstop redundancies and it's going to feel like you're covering for a lack of ability. So it's a bit of a balance. But you you really want to kind of just think about what kind of freelance you've done, and are you like, oh, I've done a lot of technical design and concepting, or have I just done illustration, or whatever. Like, because also freelance, like game design and logo illustration or UI UX design or effects work or animation, it's all going to be very different from freelance concepting, and sketching out ideas and what have you. Also, if you freelanced for full projects, then those always get listed separately. So if you had like Super Tiger Bro Man the game, and you did like a 6-month stint on that, that would be one freelance entry, and then you could generalize the rest of your freelance outside of that or overlapping that time. So definitely try and get the most bang for your buck with it, but don't be too nervous because a long stint of freelance still counts for a lot. Also, if you have any follow-up questions, go ahead and type those out. That's fine. Minigenda says, is there a number of years of experience after which a college degree no longer should be mentioned, or is it essentially eternal? I would say always listed. I've never seen a reason not to, unless it was irrelevant from the get-go. Like even if you had like an architectural degree and you go into concept design, that will still look interesting to people, and they'll still go, oh, well, that's an artistically inclined position that has technical thought. And there's also an assumption kind of from a lot of non-artists in game dev that artists are stupid. So it helps if you can show that you're technically minded and doing artwork in that space. There's a benefit to it. But I would say always show that you did a degree. And if it's irrelevant, you probably want to post it anyways. Don't take my word heavily on that, but I would, from my experience, because it still shows you went to college, you put time in, and then you pivoted. And if that becomes a conversation piece for people, that's a good lead-in for you to explain your situation and go, I was really passionate about this thing, so I pivoted to here and tried to leverage, the work ethic that I got within my college years into what I'm doing now. So hopefully that's helpful. Bucky says, if you are a freelancer that does not say for work, would you avoid mentioning it entirely or dance around the fact that not safe for work stuff is your primary genre? You can list it, but you have to list it. You have to kind of list it as classily as possible without getting into it. And at times, what you may want to do is like, if you're like, oh, I did a bunch of freelance illustration, right? And it is all not safe for work. You put that you did freelance illustration, but you don't list that it's not safe for work. And then if people ask, why isn't that on your portfolio? You can, in that conversation, contextualize it as a lot of that was adult-oriented artwork, so it didn't feel appropriate to put on there. And then there's another conversation that can happen depending on what it is. If you feel that there's enough you can show while censoring it, you could, and you were far enough in that they were like, do you have other examples? You can be like, well, the only examples I have are adult, but I could censor them. But I mean, if you're doing like porn comics and stuff like that, that's going to be probably a no-go. But generally, you can list it that you did the work, and you don't have to contextualize it too far beyond that. So you don't have to be like, I worked for a porn site for 10 years. You'd be like, I worked for a pay site doing illustrations, comics, and concepts for 10 years. And well, they'd be like, what's a pay site? Then you can contextualize. But you're already in the conversation at that point, which is good. You're basically wanting to show that you were working, but you don't want to lean the conversation towards adult-oriented concepts if you can avoid it, because it's just kind of professionally inappropriate in certain ways. You want them to lead you into that direction, not you to lead them into that direction. All right. That's those questions so far. If anybody has further questions, I'm going to give a moment in case you're typing them out. I'm going to drink some water. Hopefully the pacing of this talk is working okay. Feel free to tell me if you think it's going okay. Because I always get nervous anytime I'm talking. Pacing is good? Okay. Yeah, this was me learning Google Slides, so it's going to get a little wild later. All right, cool. Slides help a lot? Cool. It's going to get weird later. We'll see if it hurts or helps. Favorite keywords that ATS might love. So this is going to overlap with a LinkedIn section, but really it's going to be simple language and work or position oriented and skill oriented things such as illustration, concept art, games, things like that. It's really like dumb yourself down a little bit and pretend that your resume is going to be passed not just in front of an angry HR manager and a unfeeling ATS scan, but also like a 10-year-old. You know what I mean? So that's what we mean by don't use a lot of jargon. You know, if I say things, I think even here, like at scale and stuff like that, like a 10-year-old's probably not going to know what that is. So, you know, something to consider. Minigenda says, assuming that one had done consulting work for many clients over a long period and no longer had a perfect history, would the appropriate resume listing of that work be like your suggestion for freelance, broad categorized? At that point, likely, yeah. I mean, again, you can contextualize in conversation if you need to. You just want to outline your skill set that you got from that experience. It's kind of like if you had a job and you were fired from a job, but you would still list that job. And I get into this a little bit later. But you don't need to go, this is the job, this is the skills I did, I was fired from this job. You would just go, I worked this job from this time to this time, and I executed these duties, and I acquired these skills. Correct. You're going to present the info so it doesn't look like you're hiding a failure, but you're also kind of not dwelling on what honestly is irrelevant in the moment of that conversation. And moments for if there's any further questions. I'm going to move on in a minute or two. It sucks that my chair is squeaking because I kind of like to keep myself energized. I rock back and forth a little bit, and then the chair is going to squeak. And so now I have to like sit still, which is not a normal thing for me. You can't hear the chair? Not yet. Not yet. All right. Okay, cool. We're going to move on then. If it suits you all, it's time to move on. Change channels here.